Welcome to the Crystal Case Studies podcast. Today we are going to be looking at the very iconic Herkimer diamonds, which are of course the very small, sparkly and glittery doubly terminated quartz points from Herkimer in New York State in the USA, which have a very interesting and unique geological origin. Now, before we get started, if you are new to Crystal Case Studies, this is the place where we deep dive into crystal geology with interesting and relevant geology for the crystal healing community. So whether you're a crystal practitioner, a crystal buyer or seller, or you just want to understand more about the science in your stones, this is the place for you. With deep dives into specific crystals and their formations and fascinating expert interviews, there is something here for everyone. Starting this season, most of our episodes are going to be available in a video format on YouTube and Spotify, allowing you to not only listen, but see a bit more of the beautiful crystal formations that we're going to be talking about. Audio-only versions will be available as usual on all other podcast platforms, and video watching will not be necessary to enjoy the experience, but if you want a little bit more, it's there for you. Now, before we get started on today's topic, I am starting a new tradition. Roughly at the beginning of each month, I'm going to be sharing what crystal or kind of crystal adjacent book I'm currently getting my teeth into. So right now, I am really enjoying The Collector's Guide to Quartz and Other Silica Minerals by Robert J. Lauf. Now, this is a bit of a staple. I think quite a lot of people will have heard of this one. I was lucky enough to receive this one and a couple other of his collector's guides, because I think he's done about 14, which all, I want all of them. Now I think I've got 3 now. And I want all of them. And this one especially very topical for talking about Herkimers, because of course they are a quartz. Basically everything you may need to know about quartz, especially as a crystal seller. Some of it is very advanced even for sort of strict mineralogists. This is a fantastic place to get started, really. If it's not in here, you probably don't need to know it. It's probably not very interesting. And I'm really enjoying this. I've referenced these books a lot when I've been putting together my workshops and my mini classes. So this one is available through the link down below. So now we can get on with the episode. Grab yourself a hot drink, and if you have any Herkimers yourself, make sure they are in front of you, and let's get into it. Starting on the basics, I have already mentioned that Herkimers are doubly terminated, which is a very important characteristic of them. And they are prized, especially for their really unusually good clarity and their very, very sharp form. So Herkimers, they sort of just look like solid water, really. They are absolutely water clear all the way through, unless they have anthracite inclusions, which is another really distinctive feature of Herkimers, which we will be talking about today. They are found in Herkimer, believe it or not, which is a very small area in New York State, a small village really, and the subsequent valley. In New York State, and they are nicknamed diamonds just due to their amazing clarity and kind of glitteriness. They are not diamonds, they are a quartz. They are only diamond by the name. They are not related to diamonds chemically or geologically, but to be honest, with how sparkly they are, I really think that if you were to see Herkimers next to a raw diamond, especially out and about, especially if you're like digging around in rocks, most people would probably choose the Herkimers for their sparkliness rather than the raw diamond, which is pretty interesting. Now you can see from this video here that Herkimers are extremely shiny and glittery. I do have Herkimer diamonds available on my online shop, but they very commonly have these little specks of a black inclusion, which is the mineraloid anthraxolite. We will be getting onto that and what mineraloid means in comparison to mineral, and what anthracite actually is, because the anthracsolite is this brilliant fingerprint left behind by their unique formation in quite an interesting geological environment. So as I've already mentioned, Herkimer diamonds are a variety of quartz. They are just a specific quartz formation. So they do have a hardness of about 7 to 7.5, like the other quartzes. This maybe kind of misquoted somewhere, possibly. Sometimes there's a bit of a sales technique, but they are a quartz. They have a quartz hardness, and they are of the trigonal crystal system. But I also caveat this with the fact that between some authors and between literatures, this may be described differently. The trigonal crystal system in America is defined as a subsect of the hexagonal crystal system. It's described as like a subcategory of the hexagonal crystal system. But in Europe, this is different. In the UK and Europe, we define the trigonal crystal system, which is a tongue twister, the trigonal crystal system as its own crystal system, separate to hexagonal. So the literature may be slightly different on the two, but they do both agree that Herkimer diamonds are of the trigonal system. And now onto their geological formation. So the host rock of Herkimer diamonds. So if I ever talk about host rocks as a geologist, so Herkimer diamonds are little quartz points which have been mined out of a host rock. The host rock in this case is older than the quartz points themselves, or older than the diamonds themselves. The host rock of Herkimers is a dolostone or a dolomite. Dolomite is actually the mineral that dolostone is made up of, but pretty colloquially, those two words are used interchangeably, and often people call the stone dolomite as opposed to calling it dolostone. So if you ever see those two different words, it basically means the same thing for geologists. And dolostone is actually, or dolostone or dolomite is actually a type of limestone. So this limestone was originally deposited in marine waters around 500 million years ago. Now, limestone is a rock which is formed in marine environments, and a lot of limestones are essentially formed out of the exoskeleton, or the shells of marine organisms. So quite a famous type of limestone is chalk. We all know chalk, you know, the stuff you write on chalkboards with, or the White Cliffs of Dover if you're here in the UK. Those are made of chalk, and chalk and other limestones are made of the tiny little exoskeletons of these marine organisms. So chalk specifically is made of coccolithophores, that's what the marine organisms are called. Other limestones are made of kind of other variations of this, but they are all limestones are some variation of the chemical formula CaCO3, which is calcium carbonate. So sometimes you hear geologists saying calcium carbonate or limestone. Again, those two phrases or words are sort of used interchangeably often there. I've already mentioned that Herkimer diamonds themselves are found in a dolostone. So throughout geological time, there has been meteoric seepage, which is a posh way of saying rainwater has essentially percolated and infiltrated down through the limestone, and it's chemically altered it. It's introduced magnesium. So dolostone is this magnesium rich sister of limestone, and it's introduced magnesium into the limestone, and it's chemically altered it into dolostone. Right, so in terms of looking at the geological story of Herkimer diamonds, it's actually pretty unique. I am going to be drawing very heavily from a fantastic website called herkimerhistory.com. It will be linked in the show notes below. This website essentially breaks down the step-by-step, the process of the most accepted theory for the formation of Herkimers, down into about 7 or 8 steps. I have shortened this very slightly. I do definitely recommend, if you use Herkimers or you sell them or you're interested in them, for you to go and check out this website for yourself, because it is an absolute gold mine, or a diamond mine, pun intended, of brilliant photographs and sort of first-hand accounts of Herkimer extraction, and yeah, it's really good. I've learned so much from that site, so I really recommend it. But essentially, so herkimerhistory.com, it breaks it down into these steps. So first off, we have the formation of the birthplace and the development of the vugs. So vug is a word that geologists use to describe the little pockets that crystals might form inside of. So it's like the precursor to a geode, basically. So an empty geode that a crystal has not formed inside of is a vug. And that's this first stage and the formation of the birthplace of Herkimers, which is our dollar stone, which I've already mentioned. So this will have been first deposited in a marine environment. I've said it's around 500 million years ago. This is in the Cambrian period, and the dollar stone around Herkimer is known as the Little Falls Formation, which, as I say, is a Cambrian limestone turned dollar stone because of this magnesium-rich alteration. The second step in this journey is the introduction of fluid pathways. So something that's very, very important for crystal formation and specifically Herkimers, especially with the anthraxolite and the hydrocarbons, which we're going to get onto, are the importance of fluid pathways. So if you have a completely impermeable, an impermeable rock, so impermeable for geologists means whether or not a fluid is able to move through the rock. The fluid moving through the rock is known as percolation or permeation. And you can imagine this as the difference between, like, if you poured some water on top of like a sponge layer, the water would be able to soak through into the sponge and then kind of drip out the bottom of the sponge layer, versus if you were to pour water onto a sheet of glass. Glass is not permeable. The water would pool on top of the glass, but it would not be able to permeate through the glass. In geology, most sedimentary rocks are permeable and very, very porous. So if we're looking at like sandstone, chalk, limestone, all those sorts of rocks, those are all sedimentary, and they all have quite big pore spaces, which is the little gaps in between the grains which make up the rock, and they all allow water or other fluids to pass through them quite easily. Now, in the case of Herkimer diamonds, they are also in a tectonic zone, so there is a trend of faults running through the area. This improves a rock's permeability even more, so you're providing even more fluid pathways for fluids to move up along. This is very, very important if we're thinking about crystal formation. For a fluid to move through and then deposit these crystals there, like a silica-rich fluid to move through this geology and deposit these crystals there, it has to have had a pathway to move along. So the second step, this tectonic activity, which has resulted in these faults or these fantastic kind of crystal highways, if I like to think of them as. We then have an oil event. So at some point since this rock's formation, obviously many million years ago, when I say at some point, I don't mean recently, but since this rock's formation, slightly less time ago than 500 million years, but still many, many millions of years ago, a hydrocarbon has moved through this region. So we no longer have, talks about this very well on the website on Herkimer history. So we no longer have kind of active like oil deposited in this geology, but there are loads and loads of traces that it was there at one point. The best trace being that many of the vugs, when they are opened up, are full of anthraxolite, which is the mineraloid which is kind of left behind, or a hydrocarbon may form if it's there over a very long period of geological history. So we've had this oil event. Now, the oil the presence of this hydrocarbon or this oil appears to have had a very direct influence on the clarity and the form of Herkimer diamonds. So not only has it given the Herkimer diamonds many of those black inclusions are anthraxolite. They wouldn't be there if there hadn't have been this oil. There appears to be this correlation between how clear and well formed the crystals are, and how much anthraxolite is found within a vug, basically. So it's called a jewelry box, actually, which I think that's just such a brilliant mental image. that apparently the miners in the Little Falls area, in the Herkimer area, if they open up a vug or a pocket which is really full of anthraxolite, they know that the Herkimers in that pocket will be ultra clear and ultra glittery, and they call it a jewelry box because it looks like a jewelry box. It looks like a black kind of velvet jewelry box with these like diamonds sitting inside of it, which is just so cool to think about, and such a good mental image there, and makes me want to absolutely dash over to get my arse over to Herkimer in New York State and see them for myself as a geologist. That sounds absolutely gorgeous and yeah, brilliant. So the next event within the series of geological stepping stones towards Herkimers being with us today is referred to as a crystal seed event, which this sounds magical as well, where essentially it appears a lot of evidence suggests that after following the introduction of a hydrocarbon into this environment and many of these vugs and these pockets and these pore spaces within this sedimentary rock, following all of that, but having oil introduced to it, we've had a crystal seed event or a crystal frost, which is an even better term, and just sounds totally magical, where basically millions and millions of extremely small quartz points, to the point where it's referred to as a crystal frost. So I've mentioned Herkimer diamonds are very small. This is on kind of the fraction of a millimeter scale. A crystal frost event has occurred where all of these tiny little seeds, these crystal seeds, have been formed throughout these pockets and throughout these vugs. Now, these are very, very small, and these have acted. The reason why it's called the crystal seed event is because these tiny crystals have essentially acted as like starting points or like nucleus points for larger Herkimers. And again, I say larger, but I literally mean any Herkimer you can see with your naked eye, to form around. So something really interesting that Herkimer history points out is that many Herkimers, actually inside the Herkimer itself, maybe the anthracsolite inclusion is in the shape of a tiny Herkimer, or they have very tiny bubbles inside of them, or what look like very tiny bubbles in the shape of a tiny Herkimer. And they believe that there is some kind of relationship there between these crystal seeds and the Herkimers, which have subsequently formed around the outside of them. But they appear to have essentially acted as like tiny nucleation points for the Herkimers to form around. The following, after the crystal frost, this event where the larger Herkimers have formed around them, this next step in the stepping stones is known as the Herkimer diamond event, which there will have been a period of slightly like longer crystallization, essentially, because if you're going from a tiny really almost microscopic crystal, if it's a fraction of a millimeter, up to Herkimer diamonds, which you can actually handle, there will have been a longer crystal event with a longer pulse of some kind of silica rich, we can imagine some kind of silica rich fluid has moved through these pathways again and has pulsed into all these cavities, and these crystals are kind of being grown a bit more. I'm kind of, when I'm saying that, what's cast into my mind is kind of like sort of alien eggs being grown, which I don't know, that's probably not it's not the best analogy, really, but that sort of pulsing, if you think of different fluids and moving into this geological environment in pulses over geological time. That's what it cast into my head. Take that or leave it if you want to. And then finally, after we've had our Herkimer diamond event, much more recent in geological time, we have had uplift and erosion, which has essentially meant that the rocks where these Herkimers were formed, where they were deposited, have been brought closer to the surface. The top layers have been scraped off through erosion, through glaciation. That part of America saw a lot of glaciation in the last ice age. And these lithological units, so the rocks that the Herkimers are formed in, are now at the surface, and we're able to mine into them. And if they hadn't been brought to the surface and they hadn't been scraped to the top, we would not know that they were there, which is pretty cool. So you can see I've outlined basically 6 steps there, but as I say, if you go onto the Herkimer history website, I think there are 8 steps on there, and it's very detailed, each kind of moment in time for this theory, which is the most widely agreed upon theory. It's very detailed for each of those steps, what is happening and when. It's really good. So I have already mentioned anthraxolite, which of course, when we think about the geological formation, we can really understand what sort of materials have been involved and at play there. Anthraxolite is a hydrocarbon mineraloid. So other hydrocarbons are our fossil fuels like coal, natural oil and gas. Whitby jets or jets are actually hydrocarbons, and they qualify as mineraloids because for something to qualify as a strict mineral by mineralogists and by geologists, it has to have a very organized, repeating crystalline structure. So if you look at like crystal structured diagrams, you will see these unit cells which are perfectly repeated again and again and again, sort of millions, trillions of times within a crystal. Hydrocarbons and other mineraloids are good examples of other mineraloids are like opals. Jet is a mineraloid. Pearls are a mineraloid. Amber is a mineraloid. So you can say, I mean, I've said that word too many times now. And all of these substances, including anthraxolite, do not have this organized structure, but they may meet other requirements of minerals, such as being like naturally occurring. So we call them mineraloids instead. And I found this really interesting, actually, some insight from the author Nicholas Pearson, that for the crystal healing community, there is a really interesting juxtaposition between the structured and highly repetitive and highly organized structure and lattice of quartz. So our diamond, our Herkimer diamonds, this juxtaposition then from that to this disorganized carbon-based mineraloid, which is very often included in our Herkimer diamonds. I found that like really fascinating to think about. And Herkimer diamonds as well are doubly terminated. So again, within energy work, people use double terminations for the flow of energy, as opposed to something being just singly terminated. Now, if you are identifying, or if you are trying to identify Herkimer diamonds, or if you've been presented with a doubly terminated quartz point, or a selection of them, and you're not sure if they are genuine, I would say some of the things to look out for with specifically Herkimers. They will pretty much always have perfect double terminations. They are quite often a little bit tabular. So quite often they have like a long axis through them. So not the C-axis, not from point to point. Quite often they are a little bit tabular, and they are sort of flatter on one side than they are the other. They are extremely clear, extremely clear, other than the anthracite inclusions and other than those seeds, sometimes, which I mentioned before. They will be extremely clear, no kind of frosting on the outside, no they're not always, thing is, right, so I'm saying clear, but they're not always colourless. So you can have yellowy, I'll try and get a picture for the screen now for those watching. They can be like this nice yellowy colour, like a sort of a champagne colour, but they are still very, very, very translucent. So they do not have any kind of cloudiness or like opaqueness to them in there. There's no clouds within the quartz crystal. They are mostly very small. So the vast majority of Herkimers that I have seen are at least below maybe 2.5 centimeters, maybe 2 centimeters. The ones available in my shop are pretty much all, I'd say maybe 8 millimeters from tip to tip, which I'm going like this, tiny things. Which they're very beautiful. They're very, very beautiful and sparkly, but they are normally very, very small. I have seen, on Instagram, the sort of the biggest ones people have ever found. They can be bigger, maybe 5 to 10 to maybe 15 centimeters. But I mean, we know that quartz crystals, there are quartzes out there that very regularly are massively exceeding that. So the vast majority of them are very, very little. I think often you see like Herkimers being sold that are not from Herkimer. Quite often sellers put like speech marks around the Herkimer, like they are imitation Herkimer diamonds, and quite often they are larger as well, to be honest. So if you're being offered and they're a little bit cloudy or something like that, and they're all over like 2 or 3 centimeters, that would ring alarm bells for me. Within genuine Herkimers, a certain percentage of them are skeletized. When I say skeletized, this is when the faces of the quartz crystal have not formed properly. I will also try and get a picture for our watchers here. But so the faces of the quartz crystal have not formed properly. This happens sometimes when formation is happening very fast, or when conditions are a little bit temperamental and pressures and temperatures are changing a bit, and it doesn't have that perfect formation environment. So a certain percentage of Herkimers are skeletized. According to herkimerhistory.com, which is also linked below, really, really useful resource, they suggest that there is a relationship between skeletization and the amount of anthraxolite found within the vugs or the pockets. So potentially there is a relationship there. It does seem that like this hydrocarbon or this oil being present during their formation has had some kind of an impact on their form. So I don't think it's a jump to say that this relationship doesn't exist, but they essentially speculate that there is, for the pockets where there's very, very little or no anthraxolite present, you are much more likely to have skeletized crystals forming, which is interesting. That's really interesting, and I would love to see somebody specifically look into that. Genuine Herkimers, they may have anthraxolite in them, and they may have those lovely little bubbles or seeds, but they probably don't have anything else hanging in there. There's no other, very unlikely to be other inclusions like, I don't know, like a tourmaline or some irony bits hanging around in there. You're probably not looking at genuine Herkimers in that case. So our key takeaways for the lovely Herkimer diamonds. Herkimer diamonds come from Herkimer. If they don't come from Herkimer, we can't really call them Herkimer diamonds, although it's not a protected term, but it's a disingenuous term. They are doubly terminated, very clear and very, very sparkly, and they are formed in this fascinating, unique way with this relationship with the hydrocarbons and with the subsequent mineraloid anthraxolite. They appear to have been formed while suspended in vugs, and therefore we don't have this latching on, as I've discussed. And they are very, very beautiful and very widely appreciated within the crystal healing community and beyond. So for more crystal geology content, make sure to check out my regular live workshops and my pre-recorded bite-sized mini classes on crystalcasestudies.com. And to stay in touch with me, you can find me on Instagram under @crystalcasestudies. Check out the other episodes of the Crystal Case Studies podcast on your chosen podcast platform. And thank you very much for joining me.